Margaret Thompson adjusted her worn cardigan as she approached the gleaming entrance of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. At 73, she had learned that appearances often deceived, though she wondered if others had learned the same lesson. Her simple grey dress and comfortable walking shoes seemed modest against the backdrop of marble columns and crystal chandeliers that adorned the hotel's facade. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the polished lobby floor as Margaret stepped through the revolving doors. Her weathered hands gripped a small, faded handbag, the same one she had carried for nearly 2 decades. Despite its age, she kept it meticulously clean, just as she maintained everything in her life with quiet dignity. Hotel guests in designer clothing moved past her with barely a glance, their conversations filled with business deals and vacation plans. Margaret observed them with kind eyes, remembering when she too had moved through such spaces with different expectations from the world around her. The lobby buzzed with activity as bellhops wheeled luggage across the pristine floors, and concierge attended to guests with practiced smiles. Margaret had called ahead to confirm her reservation, speaking with a polite young man who had assured her everything was arranged. She approached the reception desk with the confidence of someone who belonged, regardless of what others might assume. Behind the mahogany counter, 3 staff members processed check-ins with efficient professionalism. Margaret waited patiently in line, watching the careful choreography of luxury hospitality unfold around her. She had seen such performances before, though from a different perspective entirely. The crystal chandelier above cast prismatic light across the marble surfaces, creating an atmosphere of refined elegance that spoke to decades of tradition. Margaret appreciated beauty in all its forms, understanding that true luxury often lay in details invisible to casual observers. As her turn approached, she straightened her shoulders and prepared to present her identification, unaware that her simple appearance had already triggered assumptions that would soon spiral beyond anyone's control. Jessica Martinez, the afternoon shift supervisor, noticed Margaret approaching the desk with growing concern. In her 5 years at the Grand Metropolitan, she had developed what she considered a keen eye for distinguishing between legitimate guests and those who might be confused or lost. Margaret's modest appearance immediately triggered her professional skepticism. The elderly woman's cardigan showed signs of careful mending, and her shoes, while clean, had clearly seen many miles. Jessica exchanged a meaningful glance with her colleague, David Chen, who was processing a check-in for a businessman in an expensive suit. The contrast seemed stark and telling to their trained eyes. Margaret reached the counter with a gentle smile, placing her identification on the marble surface. "Good afternoon. I have a reservation under Thompson," she said, her voice carrying the refined cadence of someone well-educated, though Jessica barely registered this detail while focusing on the woman's appearance. Jessica picked up the identification with barely concealed reluctance, scanning the name while her mind raced through possible explanations. Perhaps this was a case of mistaken identity, or maybe the elderly woman was confused about her location. The Grand Metropolitan catered to a very specific clientele, and Margaret Thompson simply didn't fit the profile. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't see any reservation under that name," Jessica said without thoroughly checking the system, her tone carrying a subtle edge of dismissal. She had already decided that this woman couldn't possibly afford their rates, which started at $400 per night. Margaret's eyebrows raised slightly, but her expression remained patient. "Perhaps you could check again. I spoke with someone yesterday to confirm the booking." David glanced over from his station, noting the interaction with growing interest. He had witnessed similar situations before, where individuals attempted to gain access to the hotel through various means. The staff had been trained to handle such situations with firm politeness, protecting the establishment's reputation and their guests' comfort. The lobby's ambient sounds, soft classical music, muted conversations, and the gentle hum of air conditioning provided a backdrop to the unfolding tension that neither Margaret nor the staff fully recognized yet. Jessica's fingers moved across the keyboard with deliberate slowness, her search half-hearted at best. The reservation system displayed multiple entries, but she focused only on those that seemed to match her preconceptions about appropriate guests. Margaret Thompson's name appeared in the system, but Jessica's bias prevented her from seeing it clearly. "Ma'am, I've checked thoroughly, and there's simply no reservation under your name," Jessica insisted, her voice growing firmer. "Perhaps you're thinking of a different hotel. There are several budget-friendly options downtown that might better suit your needs." The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. Margaret's composure remained steady, though a flicker of disappointment crossed her features. She had encountered such attitudes before, particularly in recent years as her appearance had become more modest by choice rather than necessity. Other guests in the lobby began to notice the exchange, their conversations quieting as they observed the interaction between the well-dressed staff and the simply dressed elderly woman. Some watched with curiosity, others with the uncomfortable awareness that they were witnessing something unpleasant. David stepped closer to Jessica's station, ostensibly to offer assistance, but actually to present a united front. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone suggesting that the problem lay entirely with Margaret's presence. "I'm simply trying to check into my reserved room," Margaret replied, her voice maintaining its gentle strength. "I can provide additional identification if that would help clarify the situation." Jessica's expression hardened further. The woman's persistence struck her as inappropriate, possibly even suspicious. In her experience, legitimate guests didn't require such extensive verification, and they certainly didn't arrive dressed as if they had wandered in from the street. The afternoon light streaming through the lobby's tall windows seemed to highlight the growing divide between Margaret's humble appearance and the opulent surroundings. Crystal reflected light across marble surfaces, creating an almost theatrical setting for the unfolding drama. Margaret reached into her handbag, preparing to provide whatever documentation might resolve the confusion, unaware that her simple gesture would soon escalate the situation beyond anyone's expectations. Hotel manager Patricia Williams emerged from her office, drawn by the unusual commotion at the front desk. With 15 years of experience in luxury hospitality, she prided herself on maintaining the Grand Metropolitan's impeccable reputation. The sight of an elderly woman in modest clothing engaged in what appeared to be a dispute with her staff immediately raised her concerns. "What seems to be the issue here?" Patricia asked, approaching with the authoritative bearing that had earned her respect throughout the hospitality industry. Her tailored suit and confident demeanor contrasted sharply with Margaret's simple appearance, a fact that wasn't lost on the gathering observers. Jessica quickly explained the situation, emphasizing Margaret's inability to provide valid reservation details while omitting her own cursory search efforts. "This lady claims to have a reservation, but we can't locate it in our system. I've suggested she might be more comfortable at one of the downtown establishments." Patricia assessed the situation with practiced efficiency, noting Margaret's worn clothing and modest accessories. In her experience, such discrepancies between appearance and claimed reservations often indicated confusion or, worse, attempted fraud. The Grand Metropolitan's clientele expected a certain level of exclusivity, and maintaining that standard sometimes required difficult decisions. "Ma'am, I understand this might be confusing, but our hotel caters to a very specific clientele," Patricia said, her tone professional but firm. "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding about your intended destination." Margaret's patience, while considerable, began to show signs of strain. "I assure you, I have a confirmed reservation. I can provide my confirmation number if you'd like to search more thoroughly." The lobby's atmosphere grew increasingly tense as more guests became aware of the unfolding situation. Some watched with obvious discomfort, while others seemed to approve of the staff's protective stance. The crystal chandeliers continued to cast their elegant light across a scene that was becoming anything but elegant. Patricia made a decision that would soon prove catastrophic. "I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises. We simply cannot accommodate you at this time." The words struck Margaret like a physical blow, though she maintained her dignified posture. Around the lobby, conversation stopped entirely, as guests and staff alike focused on the unprecedented scene unfolding before them. Never in her 73 years had Margaret been asked to leave an establishment based solely on her appearance. "I believe there's been a serious misunderstanding," Margaret said, her voice carrying a tremor that spoke more to emotion than age. "I am a confirmed guest of this hotel, and I have every right to be here." Patricia's resolve hardened in response to what she perceived as stubborn resistance. "Security will escort you out if necessary. We cannot allow disruptions to our guests' experience." Two security guards, summoned by Patricia's subtle gesture, approached with professional restraint but unmistakable purpose. Their presence transformed the situation from uncomfortable to humiliating, creating a spectacle that would be remembered by everyone present. Margaret looked around the lobby, seeing faces that ranged from sympathetic to coldly approving. Some guests seemed embarrassed by the scene, while others nodded in apparent agreement with the staff's actions. The divide in reactions spoke to deeper societal issues that Margaret understood all too well. "This is unconscionable," she said quietly, her words carrying across the suddenly silent lobby. "You're making a terrible mistake." The security guards flanked Margaret respectfully but firmly, their presence making clear that her departure was no longer optional. Patricia watched with satisfaction, believing she had successfully protected her hotel's reputation and maintained the standards expected by their discerning clientele. Margaret gathered her small handbag and walked toward the exit with as much dignity as the circumstances allowed. Her steps were measured and deliberate, refusing to hurry despite the humiliating escort. The revolving door that had welcomed her just minutes earlier now served as the exit for her public embarrassment. As she disappeared from view, the lobby slowly returned to its normal rhythm, though the tension lingered like an unpleasant aftertaste. Patricia returned to her office, confident in her decision, while the staff resumed their duties with the satisfaction of a job well done. James Richardson, CEO of Richardson Hospitality Group, received the call in his downtown office 30 minutes after Margaret's departure. His assistant's voice carried an unusual urgency that immediately captured his attention, though the initial details seemed routine enough to delegate to his operations team. "Sir, we've received a complaint about an incident at the Grand Metropolitan. A guest claims she was refused service and escorted out despite having a confirmed reservation." James paused in reviewing quarterly reports, his business instincts recognizing potential liability issues. "What's the guest's name and reservation details?" "Margaret Thompson, sir. She's requesting to speak with senior management about what she calls discriminatory treatment based on appearance." The name meant nothing to James initially, though something about the situation troubled him. In his 20 years building the Richardson hospitality empire, he had learned that such complaints, while rare, could escalate quickly in today's social media environment. His hotel's reputations depended on consistent, respectful service, regardless of guests' backgrounds. "Have you verified her reservation status?" James asked, already reaching for his laptop to access the hotel's management system remotely. "The front desk staff insists they found no reservation, but the complainant seems very certain of her booking details." James logged into the Grand Metropolitan's reservation system, his fingers moving quickly across the keyboard as he searched for Thompson reservations. The database revealed several entries, but one particular booking made him pause. The reservation was not only confirmed, but carried special notations that made his blood run cold. Margaret Thompson's reservation included VIP status markers and a note indicating her relationship to the hotel's ownership structure. James stared at the screen, his mind racing through the implications of what he was seeing. This wasn't just a customer service failure, it was a catastrophic error that could have far-reaching consequences. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his phone, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether his company could recover from what appeared to be an unprecedented crisis in judgment. James's phone call to Patricia Williams lasted less than 3 minutes, but those minutes changed everything. His voice, typically calm and measured in business discussions, carried an edge of barely controlled panic that Patricia had never heard before. "You did what?" James's question echoed through Patricia's office, causing her to grip the phone more tightly. "Describe exactly what happened, and don't leave out any details." Patricia recounted the afternoon's events with growing unease, sensing that her confident decision was somehow being questioned. "The woman simply didn't fit our clientele profile, James. She was dressed inappropriately and couldn't provide proper verification of her reservation." "Did you actually search for her reservation thoroughly?" James asked, his voice growing dangerously quiet. "Well, Jessica checked the system and we couldn't locate anything under Thompson." James closed his eyes, feeling the weight of impending disaster. "Patricia, Margaret Thompson isn't just any guest. She's the widow of Thomas Thompson, founder of Thompson Industries and one of our largest shareholders. She owns 12% of our company." The silence that followed stretched for what felt like an eternity. Patricia's face drained of color as the implications crashed over her like a wave. Margaret Thompson wasn't just a guest, she was effectively one of their employers, a woman whose late husband had helped finance the very hotel from which she had been ejected. "That's impossible," Patricia whispered, though even as she spoke, she knew James wouldn't make such a statement without absolute certainty. "She's been staying at our hotels for decades, usually under special arrangements that respect her preference for privacy and simplicity. She deliberately dresses modestly and avoids drawing attention to her wealth." Patricia's mind raced through the afternoon's events, seeing them now through a completely different lens. Every dismissive comment, every assumption about Margaret's inability to afford their services, every moment of the humiliating escort from the premises took on a horrifying new significance. "James, I had no idea." There was nothing in her appearance or behavior that suggested, "That's exactly the point, Patricia. She shouldn't have to prove her worth through expensive clothing or ostentatious displays of wealth." Patricia's office became a command center of frantic activity as the full scope of the disaster became clear. Phone calls flew between department heads, each conversation revealing new layers of the catastrophic error that had unfolded in the lobby just hours earlier. Jessica Martinez sat across from Patricia's desk, her face pale with the realization of her role in the debacle. The reservation she had failed to find was now displayed prominently on the computer screen, complete with VIP status indicators and special handling instructions that she had somehow overlooked in her haste to dismiss an inappropriate guest. "How could we have missed this?" Jessica asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The reservation was right there in the system. Patricia studied the screen with growing horror, noting details that painted a picture of their failure in stark relief. Margaret Thompson's booking included preferences for quiet rooms, minimal staff interaction, and special dietary accommodations, all indicators of a valued long-term guest who preferred discretion over display. David Chen joined them, bringing additional information that made the situation even worse. "I've been reviewing our guest history files, Mrs. Thompson has stayed with us 47 times over the past 15 years. She always books the same suite, always pays in advance, and has never once complained about service. The weight of their collective failure settled over the room like a suffocating blanket. They had not only insulted a valued guest, but had done so in the most public and humiliating way possible, creating a spectacle that dozens of other guests had witnessed. "What's our exposure here?" Patricia asked, though she dreaded the answer. David consulted his notes with shaking hands. Beyond the obvious public relations disaster, Mrs. Thompson's shareholding gives her significant influence over company operations. She could theoretically call for management changes or even demand the hotel's sale. Patricia's phone buzzed with another call from James Richardson, who was now en route to the hotel for emergency damage control. The afternoon that had begun with routine confidence was rapidly becoming the worst crisis of her career. James Richardson's limousine cut through downtown traffic with unusual urgency as he attempted to locate Margaret Thompson before the situation deteriorated further. His assistant had managed to obtain her contact information, but repeated calls to her home went unanswered, adding to his growing anxiety about the unfolding crisis. "Try the Thompson Foundation offices," James instructed his driver, knowing that Margaret often spent afternoons reviewing charitable grant applications. The foundation, established with her late husband's fortune, had donated millions to local causes over the years, making Margaret a respected figure in philanthropic circles. The foundation's offices occupied a modest building that reflected Margaret's preference for substance over style. James had visited once before, years earlier, when seeking her approval for a hotel expansion project. He remembered being struck by the contrast between her immense wealth and her deliberately understated lifestyle. Margaret's assistant, Helen Rodriguez, greeted James with professional courtesy tinged with concern. "Mr. Richardson, Mrs. Thompson returned about an hour ago. She seemed quite upset, which is very unusual for her. She's in her office, but she's asked not to be disturbed." James explained the situation in broad terms, watching Helen's expression shift from confusion to dismay as the details emerged. Like many who knew Margaret personally, Helen understood that beneath the elderly woman's gentle demeanor lay a sharp intelligence and strong moral convictions that had been deeply offended. She mentioned something about institutional prejudice and systemic failures. Helen said quietly, "I've never seen her so disappointed in people she trusted." The weight of those words settled heavily on James's shoulders. Margaret Thompson wasn't just angry about poor service. She was disillusioned with an organization she had supported for decades. Her disappointment cut deeper than mere business concerns, touching on fundamental questions of human dignity and respect. James approached Margaret's office door with the heavy knowledge that the next few minutes would determine whether his company could recover from this unprecedented crisis. The woman behind that door held not just financial power over his business, but moral authority that could influence public perception for years to come. Margaret Thompson's office reflected her character, elegant but understated, filled with photographs of charitable projects rather than displays of wealth. She sat behind a simple wooden desk, reviewing grant applications with the same careful attention she brought to all her responsibilities, though James could see the tension in her shoulders. "Mrs. Thompson," James began, his voice carrying genuine remorse, "I've come to apologize for the inexcusable treatment you received at our hotel today." Margaret looked up from her papers, her eyes meeting his with a directness that made him uncomfortable. "Mr. Richardson, I wondered when you might appear, though I suspect your concern stems more from business implications than genuine regret." The accusation stung because it contained enough truth to be painful. James had indeed been motivated initially by damage control, but seeing Margaret's dignity in the face of humiliation had awakened something deeper than mere business concerns. "You're partially right," James admitted, choosing honesty over diplomatic deflection. "But what happened today was wrong on every level, regardless of who you are or what you represent to our company." Margaret set down her pen and studied him carefully. "Do you understand what really happened in that lobby, Mr. Richardson? It wasn't simply poor customer service. Your staff made assumptions about my worth as a human being based solely on my appearance." The words carried weight that went beyond business relationships or financial considerations. James found himself confronting the uncomfortable reality that his organization had revealed systemic biases that he had never adequately addressed. Every day, people are judged and dismissed because they don't meet someone else's expectations of how wealth or importance should look, Margaret continued. "Today, I experienced that prejudice firsthand, and it was both humiliating and enlightening." James realized that this conversation would determine not just his company's future, but his own understanding of the responsibilities that came with power and influence. Margaret Thompson wasn't just seeking an apology. She was demanding accountability for attitudes that infected far more than just one hotel lobby. Margaret's words hung in the air between them, creating a moment of profound silence that forced James to confront uncomfortable truths about his organization and himself. The afternoon light, filtering through her office windows, seemed to illuminate not just the space, but the moral complexity of the situation they faced together. "You're absolutely right," James said finally, his voice carrying the weight of genuine recognition. "What happened today reflects failures that go far deeper than staff training or customer service protocols. We've created an environment where prejudice masquerades as professional judgment." Margaret nodded slowly, appreciating his willingness to acknowledge the broader implications. "I've spent decades supporting businesses and organizations that I believed shared my values of dignity and respect for all people. Today shattered that assumption." The conversation that followed revealed the depth of Margaret's disappointment and the scope of changes she believed necessary. Her concerns extended beyond personal grievance to systemic issues that affected countless others who lacked her resources and influence to demand accountability. "How many people have been turned away from your establishments based on similar assumptions?" Margaret asked. "How many individuals have been denied service because they didn't conform to someone's narrow definition of appropriate appearance?" James found himself without adequate answers, realizing that his company's policies had never adequately addressed such scenarios. The focus had always been on maintaining exclusivity and catering to wealthy clientele, without considering the human cost of such approaches. "What would you need to see to believe that real change is possible?" James asked, understanding that Margaret's response would determine whether their business relationship and his company's reputation could survive this crisis. Margaret considered the question carefully, her expression reflecting the serious thought she brought to all significant decisions. Systemic change requires more than apologies or policy adjustments. It demands a fundamental shift in how your organization views and treats all people. The challenge she presented was both daunting and necessary, requiring James to choose between comfortable status quo and difficult transformation. Margaret Thompson's proposal was both simple and revolutionary, a complete overhaul of Richardson Hospitality Group's training, policies, and culture to eliminate the biases that had led to her humiliation. Her conditions for continued investment and support were non-negotiable, reflecting decades of experience in creating meaningful change through strategic pressure. "I want every employee, from housekeeping to management, to undergo comprehensive sensitivity training," Margaret stated, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. Not superficial workshops, but deep education about unconscious bias, dignity, and respect. James listened carefully, understanding that Margaret's demands represented more than damage control. They offered an opportunity to transform his company into something better than it had been. The financial implications were significant, but the moral imperative was even greater. Additionally, I want clear policies established that prohibit discrimination based on appearance, with meaningful consequences for violations, Margaret continued. And I want regular audits to ensure these policies are actually implemented, not just written on paper. The scope of changes Margaret outlined would require months of implementation and significant financial investment. More challenging still, they would require James to confront resistance from staff and shareholders who might view such measures as unnecessary or excessive. Finally, Margaret said, her tone growing more personal, I want the staff members involved in today's incident to understand the real impact of their actions, not through punishment, but through education that helps them recognize the humanity in every person they encounter. James found himself facing a decision that would define not just his company's future, but his own legacy as a leader. Margaret Thompson was offering him a chance at redemption, but only if he was willing to embrace fundamental change rather than superficial adjustments. Mrs. Thompson, James said slowly, your conditions are more than fair. They're necessary. I accept them completely, and I commit to implementing every change you've outlined. The agreement they reached that afternoon would transform Richardson Hospitality Group from a luxury hotel chain into a model of inclusive excellence that other companies would study and emulate. 6 months after Margaret Thompson's humiliation at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, the transformation of Richardson Hospitality Group was evident in every aspect of their operations. The comprehensive training programs Margaret had demanded were now industry models, studied by hospitality schools and adopted by competitors seeking to avoid similar crises. Patricia Williams had initially resisted the changes, viewing them as excessive responses to an isolated incident. However, her participation in the mandatory sensitivity training had proven transformative, opening her eyes to biases she had never recognized in herself. She now led workshops for other hotel managers, sharing her experience as a cautionary tale and teaching tool. Jessica Martinez had undergone the most dramatic personal transformation. The young supervisor who had dismissed Margaret based on appearance now served as the hotel's guest relations specialist, with particular responsibility for ensuring that every visitor felt welcomed and valued regardless of their appearance or perceived status. The Grand Metropolitan's lobby, once a stage for prejudice and humiliation, had become a symbol of inclusive hospitality. Staff members approached every guest with genuine respect, understanding that dignity was not determined by designer clothing or expensive accessories. James Richardson walked through the hotel's corridors with pride that went beyond financial success. The changes Margaret had demanded had not only prevented future incidents, but had created a workplace culture that attracted exceptional employees who shared the company's values of respect and dignity. Margaret herself had become a regular visitor again, though her stays were now marked by the genuine warmth and respect she had always deserved. Her presence served as a living reminder of the importance of treating every person with dignity, regardless of their appearance or perceived status. The transformation extended beyond individual hotels to influence industry standards, as other hospitality companies recognized the business value of inclusive practices. Margaret's humiliation had catalyzed changes that benefited countless travelers who might otherwise have faced similar discrimination. 1 year after the incident that had nearly destroyed Richardson Hospitality Group's reputation, Margaret Thompson stood before an audience of hospitality industry leaders at their annual conference. Her keynote address, titled The True Meaning of Service, had drawn attendees from around the world who sought to understand how prejudice could be transformed into progress. Dignity is not a luxury amenity to be offered only to those who can afford premium rates, Margaret told the assembled executives. It is a fundamental human right that must be extended to every person who enters your establishments, regardless of their appearance, background, or perceived wealth. The audience listened with rapt attention as Margaret shared her experience, not as a victim seeking sympathy, but as a catalyst for industry-wide change. Her story had become a powerful teaching tool, demonstrating how one moment of prejudice could either destroy or transform an organization, depending on how leaders chose to respond. James Richardson, now recognized as an industry pioneer in inclusive hospitality, introduced Margaret with genuine admiration. The crisis that had threatened his company had ultimately strengthened it, creating a competitive advantage based on authentic respect for all guests. The changes implemented at Richardson Hospitality Group had exceeded even Margaret's expectations. Employee satisfaction had increased dramatically, guest loyalty had strengthened, and the company's reputation for inclusive excellence had attracted new markets and partnerships. Margaret's foundation had established an annual award recognizing hospitality companies that demonstrated exceptional commitment to dignity and respect for all guests. The Margaret Thompson Award had become one of the industry's most coveted honors, inspiring organizations worldwide to examine and improve their own practices. As Margaret concluded her address, the standing ovation that followed reflected more than appreciation for her words. It represented acknowledgement of the profound changes her experience had inspired. The elderly woman who had been humiliated for her simple clothing had become a powerful voice for justice and dignity in an industry that served millions of travelers annually. The legacy of that terrible afternoon at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel would continue to influence hospitality practices for generations to come, ensuring that Margaret's humiliation had not been in vain, but had instead become the foundation for a more respectful and inclusive future.